Actually, in the Hari Bhakti Vilas, it is stated that a pure devotee like Bhaktisiddhanta or Srila Prabhupada actually does not take birth under the jurisdiction of karmic laws. Their birth and their disappearance are completely transcendental. It means that a pure Vaishnava like Srila Prabhupada, Bhaktisiddhanta, they're like very, very dear servants of the Lord. They're not ordinary human beings or conditioned souls like us. And the Srimad Bhagavatam is a nice verse. It says, O my Lord, great philanthropic souls travel on the earth on behalf of the Supreme Personality of Godhead to show compassion for the fallen souls who are averse to the sense of subordination to the Lord. It means that Krishna's intimate, dear devotees, they come here to the earth and they wander here and there on the material platform just to show mercy upon the suffering humanity. So in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna declares that, whenever and wherever there is a decline in religious principles and a predominant rise of irreligion, he either comes himself personally or appears in his various incarnations, or he sends his representatives to act on his behalf. So we can see Krishna, he sent his own man, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, who was a part of the inner circle of devotees in the spiritual world, just to rescue us from our confusion. Actually, when Bhaktivinoda Thakur was preaching back in the 1800s, he was like, he had such a big mission, to try and spread Krishna consciousness, and he had very difficult in that age because of the influence of so many different, the English were setting up educational institutions, and brainwashing everyone to say that this Vedic culture is old-fashioned, the Vedic scriptures have no relevance to the modern world, and so many things, and people, so many Sahaja groups and Christian groups, and people were just completely confused. So he had such a big mission to spread this Krishna consciousness and re-establish the pure Vaishnava teachings of Lord Chaitanya, that he was thinking, I need help. I need help. And so he prayed for a ray of, he called it a ray of Vishnu, or a very special son who could assist him in assisting him in his preaching work and also carry on his preaching work after he'd left. So not long after, in 1874, I think in about 3:30 in the afternoon in Jagannath Puri, that very special ray of Vishnu, or that very special son, appeared in this world in answer to his prayer. And that son was Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. He was the fourth son of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur named him Vimala Prasad. It means the mercy of the transcendental potency of Lord Jagannath. And of course, in the Vedic culture, they always take the children to the astrologer to get their astrology tasks done, and the astrologers were just like, they were just amazed. They'd never seen such an auspicious horoscope as Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Now he showed all the signs of an eternally liberated soul. And they predicted that this child will become world famous as a brilliant teacher of life's ultimate goal. So, we see that these representatives of Krishna who come, such as Narottam Das Thakur, the six Goswamis, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, actually been sent from Krishna's inner circle, very inner circle of confidential servants in the spiritual world, in Goloka Vrindavan. In the spiritual world, the divine couple, Radha and Krishna, they're served by these manjaris, very, very young girls who have beautiful forms like Srimati Radharani. And they have varieties of very specialized services, such as dressing and decorating Srimati Radharani, caring for her hair, massaging her, preparing very special snacks and fruits and drinks for the divine couple, and fanning them. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's eternal spiritual identity was that of one of these manjaris, these young, intimate maidservants of Radha and Krishna. And his eternal spiritual identity was that of Rati Manjari. And actually, it's amazing because it seems that Bhaktisiddhanta was fully aware of his eternal relationship with Krishna, and he used to call himself Sri Vasha Banavi Dayata Das, the servant of the beloved of Srimati Radharani. And he was always, it is said, he was always in this very intense mood of separation from Srimati Radharani, because these young manjaris, they're so dear to Srimati Radharani. They love Radharani just so much and he was just feeling this tense separation. And sometimes he would recite beautiful verses glorifying Srimati Radharani. And tears, it is said, tears would just flow from his eyes. It is said, that his devotion to Srimati Radharani was just extraordinary. And every Radhastami day he would become just completely overwhelmed and display just these symptoms of deep, loving ecstasy, being an eternal, intimate servant of Srimati Radharani. So there's so many, when he was very young, there's many stories. Of course, one story is that when he was 6 months old in Jagannath Puri, the Jagannath chariot was coming past their house, and then all of a sudden it just stopped. And they couldn't budge the chariot. They couldn't move the chariot. No one could move the chariot. For 3 days it was just there. And at that time, Bhaktisiddhanta's mother, she brought him out because she was the wife of a very, exalted personality of, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who at that time he was the manager of the temple, manager of the Jagannath Temple. So she was allowed to come onto the cart. So she came up onto the cart to see Lord Jagannath, and she was holding this little baby, Bhaktisiddhanta. And then the young baby, he just extended his hands to Jagannath as if to show offer his obeisances. And at that time, the garland from Lord Jagannath just came down and encircled the child. So everyone present was just overjoyed to see this child getting the blessings of Lord Jagannath. And it was noted too, as a young boy, generally children, they can't sit in class for very long. But Bhaktisiddhanta, as a young boy, he was just, Bhaktivinoda Thakur was giving many classes. In Jagannath Puri, every day he was lecturing on Srimad Bhagavatam, and in the evenings he was lecturing on Chaitanya Charitamrita. And this young boy, he would just sit there, just very attentively, just absorbed in his lectures given by Bhaktivinoda Thakur, his father. he was just fully concentrated with rapt attention. People were amazed to see him. At the age of 7, he memorized the whole Bhagavad Gita, every sloka, and he could wonderfully explain each and every verse. And the teachers were just like amazed at his just extraordinary intellect and memory. You know, it said he was a Shruti Dara, one who has a photographic memory. You know, he just hears something once and just always remember it. And even at a young age, he mastered different subjects. And when they saw his extraordinary intellectual prowess, the teachers, they named him Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, the master of scriptural conclusions. And he had an amazing reputation at school as an undefeated debater. And he defeated even at a very young age many famous scholars in public debates. At the age of 18, he entered the Calcutta's famous Sanskrit college, and noting, the teachers, the professors there, they noted this Bhaktisiddhanta, he's a genius. He's practically a genius. And when noting his brilliance, his teachers, they encouraged him, you should simply dedicate your life to scholarship and become like a great professor. And he would tell them that my life is not simply for scholarship and learning grammar and logic, but my life is for the single-minded cultivation of the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. And even though when he was at school and he was at college and university, he paid very scant attention to his studies, but he was always getting like 100% at his exams. And rather than concentrate on his studies, he would spend most of the time in the university library studying all the Vedic philosophical books. He became extremely learned in all branches of Vedic knowledge. And soon after, he left the Sanskrit college in order to pursue his spiritual path. And at that time, he began observing he started doing this Chatumasya, very strict Chatumasya. Now, observing in the 4 months of Chatumasya, he was performing these great austerities, chanting the holy name, studying the scriptures, only eating boiled food, just sleeping on the hard ground. Then a few years later, he met the extraordinary liberated Vaishnava saint, Srila Garuda Babaji, who said it just captured his heart. And he later, in 1900, at the age of 26, he actually approached Garuda Babaji for initiation. But at that time, Garuda Babaji, he didn't have any disciples. And out of genuine humility, he thought himself unqualified to take disciples, even though he's a very, very advanced devotee. And Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj just kept coming back, time and time again, and begging him for initiation. And in the end, Bhaktisiddhanta was so heartbroken. He was feeling so totally depraved of the Lord's mercy that he actually came before Sri Gaurkishoras Babaji with tears in his eyes. He was crying, expressing his desire to end his life. And seeing when Gaurkishoras Babaji saw the state of Bhaktisiddhanta, his heart just melted, and soon after he gave him initiation. So soon after initiation, Bhaktisiddhanta, he travelled with his father Bhaktivinoda Thakur to Jagannath Puri, because he decided he wanted to write a Vaishnava encyclopedia. And so he went there to Puri to gather information for his encyclopedia. And this encyclopedia was an amazing, elaborate presentation containing, explanations of Vaishnava terminology, biographies of great Vaishnava saints, an introduction to the books of the Vaishnava acharyas, descriptions of Vaishnava theatres, various conclusions of different Vaishnava sects. It was a very elaborate compilation. And after studying that Vaishnava encyclopedia, the Vaishnava scholars, they commented this work could not have been achieved by any mere mortal. It was indeed just a total brilliant masterpiece. And they declared that even 25 or 30 scholars with 10 or 15 assistants could not have compiled such an elaborate presentation. And they just kind of realized that this Bhaktisiddhanta, actually, he's a genius. He's a total genius. So in 1905, at the age of 31, actually he began, the disciples, they call it that he went into his pastimes of, it was kind of like a depression, because he was seeing this state of the world and how degraded people were becoming, and how fallen, and people were just falling away and giving up their traditions, their religious traditions, and he was thinking, how are we going to save this world? And at that time, he took on this great vow to chant 1 billion names of the Lord. Actually, it took him 9 years to complete this vow. And for those 9 years, he was just following the footsteps of Haridas Thakur. He was chanting 192 rounds a day, and he just lived in this really simple grass hut. He's sleeping on the hard ground through the summer, through the winter, no pillows, no blanket, no mattress. And he was just eating for 9 years. I don't know how he survived. He was just eating soaked, sun-dried rice mixed with a little ghee. And he was just chanting all day, just sleeping for a couple of hours and just chanting day and night. And then in the afternoon, he would speak to a small assembly of devotees on the glories of the holy name. And actually, I read there that when he was doing this vow, you look at him, his eyes, he was just like so powerful. He was just radiating this Shakti. So after completing his vow in 1914, at the age of 40 years, on the order of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he began his revolutionary preaching activities of the Gaudiya Math. And he began touring all over India, preaching. And he was preaching very boldly. He preached very strongly. He was attacking all these, pseudo Vaishnava Sampradayas who were just concocting their own philosophies, misleading so many people. The Sahajas who were, performing all sorts of abominable activities in the name of the pure teachings of Lord Chaitanya, the impersonalists, the Mayavadis, the caste-conscious Brahmanas. And soon he actually acquired a reputation as the Shima Guru, the Lion Guru. And actually it is said that his very name, just by hearing his name, would strike fear in the hearts of his philosophical adversaries. He would, when they heard that he was coming, they would sooner leave town than face him in a public philosophical debate. And actually, as I said, I read this, that sometimes he would defeat these bogus philosophers and so powerfly in these public debates that they couldn't contain their bowels. That was like, he would just like really smash them on the head. So Bhaktisiddhanta's mission was, spreading the teachings of Lord Chaitanya to all classes of people. In 1918, at the age of 44, he took sannyas, initiation, and then taking 10 devotees, he travelled all over India. And during that time, he revived the Navadvip Parikram. If you go to Mayapur, like 10 days before the Mayapur festival, the devotees, they do this Navadvip Parikram. They go through the 9 islands of Navadvip, and you go to all these different places where Lord Chaitanya performed all these pastimes. And very beautiful. So it was Lord Bhaktisiddhanta who revived, who initiated that Navadvip circumambulation. He also toured Vrindavan. He danced ecstatically in the Jagannath Puri Rath Yatra. He set up the Gaudiya printing works. He published the Srimad Bhagavatam. And then by 1930, at the age of 56, he was very active. And his movement, the Gaudiya Math, it was just spreading everywhere. It was just thousands and thousands of people were joining. He was continuously travelling about, lecture tours, parikrams, opening temples, initiating disciples, organising festivals, prasadam distribution, making devotees, installing deities, organising preaching parties, talking and preaching to scholars and intellectuals and viceroys and Indian kings and politicians. He was extremely active in the preaching field as he travelled all over India. And he had these incredible revolutionary ideas for spreading Krishna consciousness. He had these spectacular spiritual exhibitions with dioramas and paintings and depicting the stories and lessons from Srimad Bhagavatam, and thousands of people would flock to see these amazing exhibitions. His whole mood was to try and capture people's attention, revive their interest in Vaishnava culture and philosophy, which has been so much lost. And in his lectures, it is said, like Srila Prabhupada, he was very perspective of the world situation. He would comment on so many diverse subjects as, Professor Einstein's findings, medical experiments, or the Pope's efforts to bring peace to Europe. And it is said he was expert at making his audience see their surroundings from a Krishna conscious point of view. We see that, Srila Prabhupada, he followed in the footsteps of Bhaktisiddhanta. And it is said that, when Bhaktisiddhanta spoke, it was so powerful, so potent, that his divine words, it is said, was super concentrated with the highest spiritual potency and had the power to plant the seed of divine love in one's heart with tangible results. So, due to his, just when he spoke, it just transformed people. People they become devotees. And this wasn't just, this was also, so many impersonalists and Mayavadis and people who were even averse to Krishna consciousness and pure Vaishnavism became his devotees and disciples. And of course it is said, due to his presence, the whole atmosphere of the Gaudiya Math was just so lively. I know when I joined up back in the 60s, in the late 60s, you know, just due to Srila Prabhupada, even though he wasn't present there in the temple, just due to his presence on the earth, you could feel it in the temples. The whole temples were just vibrant. People were just so enthusiastic, you know, to get out there and spread Krishna consciousness, distribute books. It was like, and then like a year after about a year later, well no, it was about 1.5 years later, when Srila Prabhupada left, you know, we found out, I was in Adelaide, and we heard that Srila Prabhupada had just left the planet, gone back to the spiritual world. He could just feel this. He could feel it, you know. It's just something, it was just, everyone was just... So, you know, just Bhaktisiddhanta's presence there, you know, everyone was just like racing around, fired up, preaching, just enthusiastic, just wholeheartedly absorbed in devotional service. So by 1936, at the age of 63 years old, he had established 64 temples of the Gaudiya Math. He organised motor launch preachings, you know, they used to go on programs around Navadvip. You know, Japataka Maharaj took over this program. They send the motor launches from Mayapur, they go up to Ganga or Jalangi to all the villages and they do the preaching. And then, you know, he published the teaching writings of Jiva Goswami. He released the 12-canto edition of Srimad Bhagavatam. He sent disciples to Europe to preach. He established the Bhaktivedanta Research Institute, and he was initiating so many followers and so many sannyasis. And then towards the end of this year, he actually started developing a heart condition. You know, he was pushing himself so hard for so many years. His health started breaking down, and the doctors tried to restrain him. Actually, the disciples, they got the 4 best doctors in India, the most famous doctors, and they brought them to Calcutta, and they had those 4 doctors personally look after Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. And you know, they were trying to restrain him. He returned to Calcutta. You know, he knew that his life was coming to an end. So he called all these disciples and followers together. He wanted to give them his final instructions. You know, actually, when they all came together, first he apologized to them. You know, he said, actually, I've caused a lot of anxiety to many people. You know, because, you know, the mission of the Guru is to instruct the disciples. And, you know, a sincere disciple, he knows when the Guru chastises you or, you know, gives you some instruction, the Guru only has your best interest at heart. And actually, Srila Prabhupada was talking about that one day, and he said that actually, you know, a devotee, he feels great pleasure when the Guru just actually chastises him. And Prabhupada actually said once, Bhaktisiddhanta, he chastised me, and I felt so much pleasure in my heart. You know, some people may even become my enemies, because I preached very strongly, very boldly. And I pulled a lot of people into line. And I got, you know, but forgive me for that. And just realize that I only had their best interests at heart. I was just trying to help them. Just trying to inspire them in their Krishna consciousness. And then he said, all of you he started giving his last instructions to his followers and disciples. He said, all of you somehow live simply in this temporary world with a single goal of serving the Lord. And then he told them, please, whatever it takes, do not give up your Krishna consciousness. Do not give up your devotional service. In spite of hundreds of dangers and insults and persecutions and problems and difficulties, never give up the Krishna consciousness. And then he said, we only cherish one desire in our hearts, to sacrifice this body in the fire of the Sankirtan Yajna of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Jai Shri Harinam Ki Jai. And he said, we do not wish to be heroes. We don't know what fame and adoration for this by dint of our actions. But let this be our real identity, life after life. That we are simply specks of dust at the lotus feet of Sri Rupa Goswami. And then he told them, please take up this mission of preaching with great enthusiasm. All of you who are present here, please remember that our only duty and religion is to propagate the service of the Lord and His devotees. So he was living in Calcutta at that time, and then in 1937, at the age of 63, because he also, you see throughout his life, he also gave many other instructions, like so many. And when you read the account of the disciples, he taught them many things. I just remember one instruction. Once Bhaktisiddhanta, he was standing on the front porch of the temple of the Chaitanya Mutt, and he was just kind of looking at the deities through the door there. But the door was not very wide. And the disciple said, Guru Maharaj, this door's not very wide. It's very hard to see the deities from here. One can see them much better inside the temple. Bhaktisiddhanta, he just smiled. And then he turned to this disciple and he said, we should not think of the Supreme Lord as an object of our vision. Instead, we should meditate on the thought of how we can acquire some qualifications so we can become worthy objects of His vision. We should think about whether, when we come to the temple, we should think whether the Krishna really wants to see us, or whether he wants to reveal himself to us. And then he actually quoted a verse from the Chaitanya Charitamrita about Madhavendra Puri. The story of Madhavendra Puri, that little cowherd boy was coming and bringing him milk every day. And then that boy appeared to him in a dream and said, actually, Madhavendra Puri, I'm actually Krishna, and I live in this bush. During the Muslim invasion, they hid this deity in the bush. He'd been covered over by sand. And then the boy said, this little boy, Krishna, he said to Madhavendra Puri in this dream, for many days I have been watching the road, waiting for you to come. I've been wondering, when will Madhavendra Puri come here to serve me? So in this way, Bhaktisiddhanta was telling us that the Supreme Lord who succumbs to his devotee's love waits to see the devotee come to the temple with great eagerness to serve him. There's another story too. Actually, it was during one of the last lectures that he gave to a big assembly. He said, actually, one should not take many disciples. Actually, I have no disciples. everyone, all my disciples and followers are actually my gurus, because I learn from each and every one of them every day. And my prayer is that somehow or other I can follow in the footsteps of their devotion. In his complete humility, he was saying like that. And Srila Prabhupada also, he said actually, there was one commentator, Prabhupada was talking about first, second and third class intelligence. And this one man, he got a little bit disturbed in the audience. He said, I suppose you think you're first class intelligent person. You consider yourself. Prabhupada said, no. Actually, I'm just a servant of everyone else. I'm just a servant. And this is the mood of the Vaishnavacharyas. They see themselves as simply servants of their disciples. And also he's telling us, you can actually, someone who's humble, they can actually see everyone as a guru. They can learn. You can learn from everyone. Because then at the age of in 1937, at the age of 63, Bhaktisiddhanta, he was, we see that about the Vaishnavacharyas when they get near the time when they're going to leave the planet. They're not even in the world anymore. They just go into these great, deep meditative trances where they're actually in the spiritual world, performing their pastimes with the Lord in their true original spiritual bodies. So Bhaktisiddhanta, he was in these he was going into these deep meditations, and suddenly he just came out of his meditation, and he said, "Who is here? Who is here?" And then the servant, he came. He said, "It is me, Gurudev. How are you feeling?" And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he said, "What can I say? Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna." And then he just left his body, went back to the spiritual world, to rejoin his eternal pastimes as an intimate maidservant of Radha and Krishna and Guru Govinda. It's amazing because at that moment that he left this world, all the clocks in the temple stopped. They just stopped. Very mystical. And it is said that the grief and lamentation of the devotees was just beyond description. They were just sobbing and crying as if their hearts would break. They just loved Bhaktisiddhanta so deeply. And some were just chanting. They started chanting loudly with just tears flying from their eyes. Some were just falling down at his feet, calling out, "Prabhupada, oh Prabhupada." So then they bathed Bhaktisiddhanta's body in sandalwood water, and they dressed him in a new cloth, put garlands round him and tilak, and they placed him on a special new bed there in front of the deities. And thousands of people came, and they were all circumambulating him. They were chanting, doing puja, arti, big kirtan. It was just going. And then they took him to Shelter Station. Shelter Station is just in South Calcutta there. And one of his disciples was a very important government official. He organised a special train which travelled from Shelter in Calcutta to Krishnagar, which is near Mayapur. And then on that train was thousands of devotees having big kirtan. And every station, and there's a lot of stations between, I used to travel there sometimes to Calcutta, there's so many stations. Every station, they would stop the train, and thousands of people waiting there to get their final darshan of Bhaktisiddhanta, and they're all crying. I mean, he touched the hearts of hundreds of thousands of people. And then they finally got to Krishnagar, and then the very high Indian government officials were there. They all came out, bowed down to Bhaktisiddhanta, offered their respects. It wasn't just the Vaishnavas, but even the Hindus, the Muslims, the general mass of people were just crying and come out to show their respects to Bhaktisiddhanta. He just touched the heart of so many people. And he had, they all acknowledged he was a great, very magnanimous, very saintly person. Of course, they finally got to Krishnagar, and he was taken in a car to Navadvip and then on a boat over to Mayapur. And of course, when they got to Mayapur, same thousands of people waiting there. And suddenly everyone was just like crying and falling on the ground and chanting and tears flooding their eyes. And he went on a little parikrama around Navadvip, and then he was taken to the Sri Krishna Mukt, his own temple. And then he was placed there on a special bed, and then everyone was circumambulating him and doing puja. And then finally he was once again bathed, and he was taken to the Samadhi, which is near the Krishna Mukt temple. His Divine Grace Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Sri Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Ki Jai. Because there's so many different pastimes of Bhaktisiddhanta I can't really, only given a very brief on there, but there is that book. What's that book called? Yeah. Hare Krishna. Jai Shiva Parents Day Bhaktisiddhanta Ki Jai. So I think we're going to have a program here, like do the Pushpanjali. 11 o'clock, I think, about around 11 o'clock, before the midday aarti. We do the Pushpanjali, have Kirtan. Hare Krishna.